Welcome to Capture the World with D. Interviews with companies and individuals to learn more about digitally capturing the built world. Video, drone, 3D tours, pictures, panoramas, and more. And now your host, a social influencer and community activist, Dee Johnson.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Capture the World with Dee. I'm your host, Dee Johnson. Today's podcast is sponsored by iGuide, a proprietary camera and software platform for capturing and delivering immersive 3D virtual tours and extensive property data. My guest today is a guru in 3D technology. Together, we will be discussing how to create great virtual tours. So without further ado, please help me welcome the one and only Chris White.
Hey,
Good morning,
how's it going?
Chris.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Of course.
I feel so important. That's amazing.
You are.
That's so cool. Yeah, I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, so those of you who don't know who Chris is, why don't you go ahead and just give a short intro?
Right. So I am a marketing manager for iGuide, and I was myself a real estate photographer for many years. And the topic of our conversation today will be a blog I wrote a few years ago, or the subject matter in it, I should say, about how to make good virtual tours, because it's very common to people for people to have a discussion about what virtual tour is better than another, or what they should, what technology they should choose, or what kind of features they should rely on. But people very rarely talk about how to make a tour good, and across like platform. The technologies varies obviously from one tour to another, but they all have so much in common now, which is sort of funny that, you can come up with some, sort of basic insight or rules into sort of just making like a tour good and make it function and do whatever it's supposed to do. So just recently I did a virtual tour comparison, which is a fancy way of saying I made a list of lots of different types of virtual tours and I went through them, and everything's getting really similar. Every tour has its own strengths and weaknesses, but they're all using kind of, well, not all, but most are using 360s, and they're using a combination of different types of data combined into that 360. So you might have photos or video or whatever, or floor plans, for example. So the sort of tips, it's going to be a top 10 tips that we're going to go through today are going to be accessible for pretty much everyone on every technology, which is kind of cool. I'm going to load up some notes. I'm not texting, I swear.
All right. So starting at number 10. Do you count backwards?
Okay. So I've been debating whether or not to go forwards or backwards for like the last 45 minutes. So I don't know yet. Okay. So
I think you should go backwards.
Okay. So I'm going to go. So it depends on, so it's set up. I know the order I'm going to go in. I just don't know how to number them. So yeah, we're going to go backwards. We're going to go with number 10. We're going to call it 10. It's actually one on my list. So I'm going to mess that up somewhere in here.
Okay. That's okay.
So I'm sorry in advance. All right. Number 10, top tips for creating good 3D virtual tours. Number 10 is capture what your audience wants to see. This sounds really obvious, but it's not. So I've been very fortunate in that I've got to talk to a lot of people who make virtual tours using different types of technology. So that's DSLRs, systems like iGuide, systems like Matterport, and any combination in between, right? And the conversation rarely involves what should I capture? Like, what does my client want? What do people want to see in a virtual tour? So we can talk about that right now, because it's not that hard to unpack or to discuss. So from my experience, what people want to see on a virtual tour is aspects of the property that they're interested in. And those are almost always things like features, like a fireplace or a granite countertop or an appliance, dishwasher. The best example I can give actually is a dishwasher. So if you're creating a virtual tour, again, this is going to vary technology by technology, but if you're creating one where you don't have to be quite as prolific with your scans. So some technologies lend themselves to doing a sparser type of tour, which is better in some cases. Yeah. But if you don't do a scan on sort of both sides of the kitchen island, people get like upset because they want to see like what's on the other side of the island. They want to see the mini fridge and the wine rack and all that stuff. So the audience there is the one I was referring to in that example is really a home buyer. They're trying to make a decision about that home. They're either comparing multiple homes or they're deciding whether to go see it. They're making some sort of decision, maybe even just to purchase it outright. Who knows, right? But in order to do that, they need to be able to see certain details. So, if you want to create a good virtual tour that accomplishes that goal, and I guess if we're going to define good virtual tour, it's one that performs its function correctly, which is a fancy way of saying it communicates the appropriate type of information required by the audience. That was complicated. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I agree with you on this point. Capture what the audience wants to see. So I can give you an example. Mm-hmm. So I think virtual tours are great for real estate. It gives you sort of an idea of the layout. The 360 panos are key. It's so much better than a 2D photograph. It allows the users to sort of look at whatever they're interested in. But here's an example. So recently I wanted to buy some bathroom fixtures. And I went to this website here that had a Matterport tour of the showroom. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, why is this even useful? Hello.
Awesome.
Uh-oh. What did you do, you silly girl? All right, sorry. Okay, we're back. So I thought, okay, it's a showroom of like countertops and cabinets and stuff. And I thought, I get an idea of the layout of the showroom, but the stuff in the showroom changes all the time. And why do you need a virtual tour for this? This is like the silliest application. Like, I don't care what the showroom setting, like layout is. I care about the merchandise. I wanted to see everything they offer in like a list or pictures, like normal e-commerce. I don't need to see the layout of the warehouse. And my husband said, well, maybe you wanted to know so you know where to go when you get there. And I'm like, it's not that big of a deal though, but they move stuff around all the time. So even if you captured a virtual tour of a warehouse today, it's going to be different. So any kind of retail kind of doesn't make sense, right?
Moves a record, you can't really see the product very well. In a record store, it's even more silly because everything is all stacked. So in order to actually see anything, you have to park the CDs or records or whatever to see anything. So you really don't have access to the stuff anyway. So it's a bit like, you can, to your point, you can see the layout. Well, I mean, it's a record store. Like people don't need to know that. The interesting, so talking about what people want to see, like what the intended audience is trying to get. I'll give you another example where a virtual tour makes sense for just seeing the layout. So a chiropractor's office. People are kind of afraid of chiropractors sometimes. So sometimes they want to see the space before they go, just so they can kind of get more comfortable, So then it's not that they need to know that there's like a chair in a room. They're just kind of like a little bit wary, and they want, or dentist is a good one too. People get kind of afraid of dentistry. So they want to just kind of get a sense of the space, kind of reduce the anxiety. And that makes sense, And
so that really does make sense because the layout there typically doesn't tend to change.
Yeah, well, they're weird too. They tend to have little, corridors and things.
But in real estate, if you have pricing on the shelves too, and the pricing changes, it just doesn't make sense. Anyway, okay. So there are times when a virtual tour makes sense, and there are times when it actually doesn't.
Yep, it's true. Yeah. So if you're going to make your virtual tour make sense, you want to give people what it is that they're looking for. So I mentioned features, absolutely. But the other thing, there's a lot of overlap with still photos. So a lot of what makes a virtual tour really interesting and compelling is that it allows you to sort of, I'm going to do like air quotes, experience the space. Do you know what I mean? So when I'm shooting a still photo, I'm attempting to encapsulate what it's like to be in that space for someone so they can kind of feel like they're there. I don't know if I achieve this, but I try anyway. Mm-hmm. So virtual tour is the same thing. And that kind of dictates where you put your camera in terms of the tour. So you can put the scans wherever you want, but if you want to make an effective tour, put the scans where someone would be. You know what I mean? Like, don't put it in the corner. You can if you want, but if you put it in the sort of middle of the room where the action is, people can get a sense, if I was sitting in the couch and I'm like looking at the fireplace and the TV, this is kind of what it would be like. And it helps them imagine themselves in the space and then make a decision.
Yep.
So I'm really talking about the home buyer at that point.
Yeah, it's
Again,
definitely good. Virtual tours are great for homes, for selling homes and buying
Yep,
homes.
yep. They're also good. So if we take a little step outside of residential real estate for a moment, they're also really good for things like facility management or
Yes.
insurance, restoration, and construction, because they follow the same rules. Everything's just way uglier because it's not for marketing. So you just get the camera. Like, what do people want to see? Put your camera near that, and then
Yes,
provide scans of
exactly.
that stuff. Like, if it's a wall that's torn apart because there's a flood, yeah, that's what they want to see, or an electrical panel, or emergency exit or something like that. But it's funny, a lot of people spend so much time on their still photos that it's laughable how little time they spend thinking about sculpting the tour to give people what they're interested in. So I've noticed that that's a common weakness when I've been training people over the years, that people it's not even in the conversation. They'll spend like 8 hours on a photo of like a vase of twigs in it, like on a table. But then the virtual tour is like, just phone it in. Just capture some scans. As long as we got everything, we're good.
Yeah.
And that's the point, I guess, of this. So I'll just bring it home. It's not a catch-all. Don't just go shoot. This is my hot take opinion on it. Don't just go shoot the whole tour without giving it any thought. Like, think about where you put your panoramas. This will come up later in the next few things as well. All right. So now we're on so that was 10. So now it's number 9.
Number 9.
Yes. That's how numbers work. Excellent. So number 9, be mindful of what your audience shouldn't see. So what makes a really great tour is a curated experience. This is a little bit of opinion here because it depends on what you're trying to do with the tour. So what I mean by that is, and this varies from technology to technology, so this isn't, we're going to work with every system, but if you have the ability, turn off things that people shouldn't see that interfere with the experience. So that experience is going to vary depending on what industry we're talking about, but we'll just use residential real estate because it's easy. So when I sold my house, I did a tour. I didn't include the basement. I didn't want to freak people out. I probably use this story every time I'm on the show, but it's just so true. But that information is still valuable. So I created 2 experiences. One that includes the basement for the diehards who really want in there to see it. And then, no basement for everyone else because it's distracting. The basement's unfinished. It's really not a very attractive space. Mm-hmm. And you can apply that to the whole property. So I'm not going to show, for marketing purposes, closets full of junk or storage rooms or, any space that's not, I don't think, worthy of being shown to the general public. Or maybe I'm hiding stuff in there and I don't want people to see it because I dumped a bunch of junk in there.
What's in your closet, Chris?
Well, probably a lot of random nonsense. I have 3 kids, so a lot of board games.
I agree. So I've also seen instances where people have private documents sitting out.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
There was a case where they were scanning the house of a police officer, and he had like his badge out and all kinds of stuff that was like private, right?
Absolutely. Well, sensitive information can mean a lot of different things outside of residential real estate. It can be things like if you're doing an office, documents, screens, whiteboards. Yeah. Also, that information can be a public sort of issue. So different everywhere in the world, but in Canada, I'm not allowed to show like license plates and agent branding actually is another one. So I have to get in there and I have to turn that stuff off and make sure people don't see that because I'll get into trouble. So that limits, panoramas on the exterior of a property sometimes, but it's better than the alternative, which is to get in trouble, So really, you decide, number 10 was kind of show people what they want. And then number 9 is make sure that you don't show people things they shouldn't see or that don't help with the experience, and that's the same kind of conversation, right? Like, or lack of one, where people go and they're going to create a tour and they just blanket the whole property and scans with no regard for what is appropriate or not. Just as a side note to that, often that's self-correcting. So this is useful information if you're new or you've done a zillion virtual tours. But from my experience, most of the time what happens is when people have done a lot of virtual tours, they want to do as little work as possible. So they tend to go very minimal so they don't overshoot as much. That's just a general sort of thing I've noticed. Okay, moving on. Number 8. So this is going to get easier.
Number 8.
Okay, so this is going to be really obvious. And as soon as I say it, everyone's going to groan, or they should anyway. Make sure the property is ready before you show up. Okay, the number 1 problem for all real estate photographers across the entire world is that when they show up, the property is in some way not quite ready yet. It's frustrating. It's a big time waster. And it means the quality of your end product will be lessened to some degree. And you can debate on why that is. So, as simple as, a room is messy. So when you do a scan, it's not as attractive, but also often it means waiting. So instead of thinking and using your time and, spending your mental energy on making a really amazing tour, you're spending that time and energy on like walking around while the stagers are like putting stuff in place, or like while the homeowners are tossing things into closets. So that is like absolutely number one thing. So anyone with any experience already knows this.
Sometimes though, that's not in your control.
100%. Yep, absolutely. So all you can do is work around it, and then to a certain degree, try to limit the effects of that sort of ahead of time proactively.
So one of the drawbacks of the 360 panos is it's really hard to hide stuff. I mean, the whole room has to be clean.
Yeah. But can't you just put it over in the corner? Is that no? Oh, okay, I get that. People used to say it all the time. We can just move it over there, right? I'm like, as a side note, one of the interesting things about iGuide technology was that we used to have a camera system that had a rotator. So that means that you point it in this direction, shoot, point it in this direction, shoot, and then third direction, shoot. So kind of technically you could like sort of hide stuff. So if you were in a real pinch, you could say, all right, fine. You could just hold something while you shot and you can get away from it. But now we have a system that does just a full 360 in one go. So there's no hiding it now. Yeah. Now it's got to be good or you're toast. So the ready can mean a lot of things though. So I'll give you a couple hot tips. So, packed into this other tip. These are sub tips. There you go. The property is more than just like being messy. There's also access to consider. So, again, RRE will step outside to something like commercial or facility management. Sometimes what happens is you show up to a property and you don't have access. There's a door, you go to open it, you can't, and then you have to wait for like Gary, the maintenance guy, to show up with a key, and there's another hour gone. And that's happened at like every big shoot I've ever done. There's some door that's locked and I couldn't get through. And the solution to this problem, I mentioned earlier, is sort of more of like proactive, sort of preparation. So that often means just communicating expectations ahead of time. And it goes a long way. Like it's kind of huge. Telling your potential clients or your new clients or your existing clients who don't listen to you very much, what your expectation is for when you show up is really important. It's an awkward conversation, but it is what it is.
Some photographers have like a sheet they'll send out.
Yeah, like a little checklist
beforehand, which is great. Because it's an easy way of telling people what you're expecting without having to confront them.
Absolutely. And that pre-communication, you can scale that up. So we've done office buildings that are like, 300,000 square feet. And we write up a whole letter and we send it to the building managers and we say like, look, when the shoot day is this day, we're going to be here then. We've organized a reshoot day for here, but we don't want to use it, but we'll have to if you don't have all these doors open and everything's available, that kind of stuff. So it's all, very helpful. It doesn't fix the problem completely, but it does help, Now it's again, this is another technology by technology kind of thing because it varies, but some technologies allow you to go wherever you want in a property and some don't. So if you're using one that is linear, where you have to go in a logical order, you cannot use this trick, and I'm sorry for you. But if you're doing something where you can go wherever you want, you can technically work around these issues, and if you're willing to be flexible. And so that's another way to cope with it. So, and I'll give you a perfect example. So walk into a house, the homeowner's there, and they're all their stuff is just all over the floor. And you say, okay, normally I would start here, but because you're doing your thing, I'm going to go start over there. And I'm going to work around you. And there's nothing wrong with that. People hate doing it, but it is what it is. If you can exploit your technology to do that, do it. So the reason I bring that up is that some people are, I want to say hemmed in. I don't know what the word is, limited by their technology, and they follow a very consistent and stable workflow. So, part of this hot tip, which is make sure the property is ready before you show up, if I recall correctly. Yeah, it is also be flexible when you get there.
Absolutely.
And develop the skills to be flexible. So I'll give you an example in terms of iGuide because it's easy. So with iGuide, everything's automatic. You don't need to manually do anything. But if you follow an automatic workflow, that means that you have to kind of follow the rules. You have to keep within 10 feet. You have to keep within visual distance of where you were previously. Otherwise, there's no data to align itself to itself. but you don't have to do that. You can go wherever you want. So if you're willing to kind of put in the effort to kind of figure out how to manually work with that data, it'll put you miles ahead, because you can say, all right, you know what? I shot this room. I can see you're there. I'm going to go to that other room. They're not connected. That's okay. I know what I'm doing. And you can use a manual workflow to capture that space and then align it later. Computers aren't very smart, even though they seem smart. So if you can fill in where the computer fails, you can save yourself gobs of time. It's awesome. And then if the property's not perfectly ready, you can kind of work around it. Okay, so 10, 9, 8, 7. Number 7. This one
No, wait, we're on 6.
No, I think we're on, no, because that was 8.
Oh, okay.
I knew this was going to be
I can't
complicated.
count. It's okay.
That's okay. Numbers are hard. It's all right. Okay, I'm mostly sure we're on 7.
Okay.
So if we're not, we'll find out. All right, this one, again, this is very from technology to technology. If you can't do this, I'm so sorry. Always accept that you will have to edit some of your images after a shoot. So I mean the 360s. So if you're not comfortable editing 360s, figure it out. It's not that hard. And it's worth it. It's totally worth it. So I'll give you a few examples. So if you're in a bathroom and it is all mirrors and there is no decorative toilet paper holder to hide behind, your camera is going to be in a mirror.
Yeah.
With that camera in a mirror, that looks ugly. Okay, this is subjective. Some people don't find it ugly. I find it ugly. So that's why I think it makes a better tour with it edited out. So cloning an image out of using something like Photoshop or Lightroom out of a 360 image is identical for the most part to cloning one out of a normal image. And I see a lot of tours where people work really hard on the still photos, which is fair, they're important. But then the tour, they just like, nah, it doesn't matter, leave the camera in. And I'm saying right now, don't do that, because it makes your tour look crap, it makes it look terrible. But you can take that one step further. So if you can edit 360s, it really opens up some really cool possibilities. So I'll give you an example. I was at the front of a house once and I'm shooting the foyer, and I look over and the agent's having a conversation with the homeowner in the kitchen, and I can hear him and his arm is sticking out.
Oh,
and,
no.
so I'm like, all right. So either I yell, hey, Barry, move your arm, or I walk over and I say, hey, can you guys just, scooch? But I don't want to have to do that. It takes too much time. So I shoot the scan and then I make a little mental note. I usually forget these notes, so it's not a perfect solution. No, keep them up there. Keep her up there. More cats makes the podcast.
She pushed the wrong button last time.
So what I was able to do, is kind of make that call. Like, all right, it's more work to go over and have a conversation than it is to just stand here and shoot it and edit it out later. And that's awesome. It's very confidence building to go into like a house that has a lot of mirrors and just say, all right, well, I'm just going to put the camera where it needs to be, and then I'll figure it out later. And then work within that. That's awesome. So if you can edit your 360s, I mean, that's all you really need. And then it really opens up a lot of flexibility.
So in Matterport, you can't. And there are a lot of times when
I said that. I'm sorry.
I can just say it. There are times when the coloring is bad and stuff. Yeah. I also know that a lot of photographers will send out their images for, photo enhancements. Yeah, but a product like Ricoh Tours will do that for you automatically. So you save that time and money. And Ricoh Tours also has blurring now. So if you have stuff,
that's a pretty cool feature. I've had a few situations where I wish I'd had that, but they're quite rare. It's almost like photos in houses where in hindsight, you're like, those are all faces. I mean, Google could have blurred those in 5 seconds. I guess I should have done that too. So automatic blur features are awesome. No complaint. That's pretty cool. They kind of make the tour look gross, but that's right. So I just want to attach a little extra bit onto the editing. So inevitably when people start editing photos, they get a little weird feeling because there's this weird threshold where you can take it too far. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you some examples of editing that are good and some that are bad. So good, selective kind of tonal adjustments. So when you've got a 360 and you have one light that is like for some weird reason, like a yellow bulb and it looks really gross, like edit it. It's not that hard. Mm-hmm. It's totally an option. You can make the tour look a lot better if you fix the white balance in that one sort of selective region. So that's kind of cool. Removing chromatic aberration. So or spherochromatism, whatever. Basically, sometimes you'll get purple fringing. It's worse with some cameras than others, but if you use something like one of the thetas, sometimes it's corrected, sometimes it's not. That's really easy to edit in Photoshop manually. So if you can do that, you can clean up the tour really well. It's not something a lot of people notice. They actually notice, they kind of intuitively get it. So your mileage may vary, but It's very easy to remove. It's kind of cool. Something that you shouldn't do though is remove objects. So you can remove objects, absolutely. So, and sometimes it's awesome. So for example, I'm trying to think, maybe the agent's business cards are on a table and they think, oh, maybe that's branding. Should we edit that out? Yeah, no big deal. It's just on a table. It's fine. But let's pretend there's a box sitting on the floor in the corner. You don't really know what's behind that box. So if you edit it out, for all you know, there's this giant hole back there, or like a dangling electrical wires or whatever. So it, you know, there is a point at which you can go too far. You know, this is a conversation that you have to have with every client, but people often think you can do pretty much everything with Photoshop, like literally. So sometimes you have to draw a line just because you're not going to get paid enough or compensated enough to actually do those things. So yeah, it's all about making the tour better, but at the same time, you know, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot by giving yourself a 2 hours of editing time every time you shoot a virtual tour. Yeah. Okay, so that was 7. So now this is 6. All right. Create a tour that is easy to navigate or that has a suitable style of navigation for whatever your client is asking for. Okay, so again, this varies from technology to technology. But people don't put a whole bunch of thought, from my experience, into where they're placing their scan positions. Yep. Often it's just like spray and pray. Yep. And I'm going to give you some alternatives that will make a tour better, depending on what the end user wants. So my preferred, and this is from my experience, my preferred type of tour is uses floor plan navigation, which is a fancy way of saying pretty much one scan per room. And you can do that with iGuide, so that's why it's easy. That doesn't work for everybody, but if you can do it, there are some benefits. It's a very focused experience. Yes. So that means that it's very controlled, and people don't have a lot of extra positions to distract them. They just sort of go to the bedroom and they look at the bedroom. It can sometimes leave people wanting more, but often doesn't. Often it makes for a very attractive looking experience because depending on the tour platform you're using, you'll often have little, you know, dots on some sort of floor plan. And that just means it's not like a peppering of dots. It's a very deliberate placement of dots. And it gives the tour a very photo-like quality. So anytime you shoot a still image, you're framing something up and you're making it very deliberate. And you're saying, this is important. I want you to notice this. Look at all the time and energy I've spent on this. It's very valuable. If you can do that with the tour, you can raise its perceived value. This is opinion. So
no, I agree. I can speak a lot for Matterport because I've seen so many, but I've seen some where it looked like somebody just threw confetti in the air, and everywhere a piece of confetti landed is where they took a scan. And it's like,
well, there's consequences to that. So if it's floor plan navigation and it's very just one scan per space, it's simple. You click on it, you look.
And navigation is quick and easy. That's the other thing, as I found, is people get frustrated if the scans are too close, and to walk from the kitchen to the living room takes you 10 clicks. No.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. That's what I was just going to say. The main consequence is that visual navigation becomes impossible with too many, but it also becomes a bit sporadic with too few. So there are lots of ways to balance the two. So, and the reason I said that you might want a different experience depending on your client is that a lot of clients like that visual experience. They like it. You know, whether the homeowners want it or not doesn't matter. If someone's you know, paying you to create a tour and they say, I want tons of panoramas, well, you're going to give them what they want. So in that case, it makes more sense, if your technology allows it, to create an experience that is more of you know, of creating a path or strings. So what I mean by that is absolutely you create a scan in the bedroom and then you put a scan in the hallway. Fair. But then you might have scans in between to bridge the gap so that people can have that sensible sort of visual experience and pretend like they're walking through a space. You know, the alternative with too few is that they're going to teleport through walls. And then on the other side of the spectrum with too many, it's going to take a zillion years to get anywhere because they have to click like 100 times. So it's a balance, right? But compare that to something where you're trying to achieve maximum coverage. Is that a valuable navigation experience? So what I mean by that is, in the bedroom, I could scan once in the middle, and then I could go to every corner of the room and I could scan. But is that a valuable thing for people for navigation? No, not really. Most people don't go to the corners of room. It may be valuable depending on the property for whatever details are in those corners. So if there's like it's a very fancy house and there's like a nook with a fireplace and it's a separate thing. Yeah, for sure. But often getting adequate coverage is less important than creating a navigable tour, because when people are asking questions about a property and trying to make decisions, they want to get an understanding of the space and they want to see key features, kind of what we outlined at the beginning. So having panoramas in the corners doesn't necessarily give you that. It makes it harder to understand the property because now you've got extra scan points that you're trying to avoid in order to path. If you've got a clear set of scans going from one place to another, then it's, as I said before, it makes the experience seem more valuable, because then you can see, oh, I see where they want me to go. It's that way, and then they don't have to jump through walls. So, but it's a bit of a balance. So another reason why I prefer fewer scans is that I'm like to be efficient, which is a fancy way of saying lazy. And the more scans, the more work, right? You can do a really quick calculation. If every scan takes you 10 seconds to a minute, then the more you do, the more you work. So in order to be, fast on site, you don't want to do lots of extra work if you can avoid it.
So I agree with that. The other thing I would add is scan, like if you're going down a hallway or anywhere, scan in a straight line, or scan sort of, don't zigzag and go up and down and all that, because people will get dizzy. The other thing is if you're scanning for like insurance, restoration, all that, that's a totally different story. You want to scan everywhere. Like if there's a
that's true. Yeah, coverage is like super
scan
critical
there, but you're not talking then about navigation. You're talking about documentation. So it's different.
Yep.
Depending on what you're doing.
100%. Yeah, you're going to configure the tour to be whatever it is that you're being paid to make. So in a situation where it's facility management and they're like, we want to show this a bank of equipment, then just go nuts. It varies from tour to tour. So it's always acceptable as well, even though this is a waste of time, to shoot more and show less. Yep. So most tours can do this, but you can shoot, like, say, I don't know why you do this, but 50 panoramas in the living room and just show the best one. Something wrong with that. Well, it's a lot of extra work. But,
some people take their 2D photos out of the 360 panos.
Yep, that's true. Actually, that's a good point. That's a really good point. So if you're pulling still photos from any 360 camera, often that requires you to back up into a corner just so you can get the field of view that would make sense. So that's actually a really great reason. That's a really good
point. And you lower your camera too, right?
Oh, it depends. Actually, we're going to talk about that next. Excellent segue. Holy smokes. Good stuff. Okay, so 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Keep your camera low most of the time, except when you don't. So the reason I say this is that there's some debate about what camera height should be.
Yep.
So I'm going to offer my personal opinion about what makes a tour look good. And there's no one right answer. It's just somewhere in between here. And it's more efficient to pick a height that works for your photos and for the tours simultaneously, accepting some of the limitations that you're going to have with the tour. So, and we can talk about this in a second. But that spot depends on how tall you are as well. But that sweet spot is high enough to see things, but not low enough to see too much. So I like personally, it's just a subjective like thing as well. Like there's no one right answer. So I like a lower camera. I think it looks cool. When it's too high, it looks kind of cheap and weird to me. But like I said, if you go too low, all of a sudden you can't see sinks, you can't see faucets, you can't see details that people want to see. And if you keep going even lower, you're going to see under furniture and people don't really clean very well. This all completely falls apart in a scenario like insurance, restoration, construction, because in that case, you're going to do some weird stuff. You're going to put the camera right on the floor to get that flood and water damage. You're going to get right into cabinets and you're going to do some strange things. But in residential real estate, low, in between navel and neck, depending on your height, it's going to be somewhere in there, with a few exceptions. And so those exceptions are when you have to raise the camera to see stuff. That's what can happen sometimes. So I'll give you a really popular example. Someone's made like a cool rec room and they have like a mini bar, and like it just blocks everything because it's kind of high, right? And then there's a bar stools, so sometimes you have to raise the camera up just to get a look like that cool stuff. Or any scenario where you'd want to raise your camera up to see down on something, just because you want to show whatever feature or detail that is. The other reason why you might raise your camera is for VR. So if you shoot a virtual tour in VR and you keep the camera really low and you view it in VR, it's awesome. It's like you're 5 years old because you feel so small. And I don't know if people really like view tours in VR anymore, but if that's your thing, VR is your thing, then you definitely want to have the camera up a little bit higher so it doesn't look weird. It's a compromise because it's going to make, in my opinion, the actual tour when viewed online, in an iframe or on a discreetly on its own URL, look a little bit weirder because it'll be a little bit higher. But that's, if VR is your jam, that's cool. That makes perfect sense.
So what I tell people who are scanning with Matterport is extend one section of the legs of the tripod and then extend the center pole all the way up. And that's the height that you should be scanning at. And don't go up and down because that makes people seasick.
Yeah, it does. As you transition from one panel to the next, keep the height consistent for sure. I have a bunch of Manfrotto tripods and I almost always do the same thing. It's like, I don't know, if that's a 3 segment extension, I'll do like 2 or something, and then I'll extend the center column just enough to get a grip on it. And that's about it. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of where you sort of,
well, if you do all 3 with Matterport, what happens is you see the tripod at the bottom because it's wider. Yeah. So if you just do the 2.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess, you want to be minimizing what you see when you look down at the nadir. And then some tripods are kind of crummy. So like, your mileage may vary depending on how like good your tripod is. So if it's sort of crummy, you don't want it to go very high because it'll get really wobbly. So that's no fun.
Good point.
Okay, moving on.
Number 4.
6, 5, 4. Oh, this was like the perfect segue. We're really good at this. Have you noticed? Keep your gear steady. So this is like not such a big deal anymore, but it used to be a huge problem. I suppose people still do this, but like, how you'll have like manual rotation or some kind of mechanism that means you have to touch the camera. So if you're using a DSLR on a Nodal Ninja rotator type thing, there is a lot of opportunity for camera shake and for some kind of movement, in between shots during a set of HDR brackets. So, I mean, it sucks to pay for an expensive heavy tripod, but like they're good, like if you get a good one anyway. So sometimes having a really stable setup means you can get really consistent results. And you don't have to worry so much about your HDR not working out or whatever. So that's not as important as it used to be. When I originally wrote this a few years ago, there were a lot more manual movement type things, but now a lot of people are using like 2-lens 360 cameras. Yeah. And those they don't move. You don't really touch them. So
and they're super light.
Oh, they weigh nothing, right? You can put it on a monopod with a little thing. So often they're pretty good. You don't have to try so hard unless you're using a heavier camera, but you still want to keep it steady. So that's something. So what were we on? Was
3.
That 4?
Number 3.
Oh, now we're on 3. Oh yeah. Okay. Now we're going to get into sort of like some stuff that's a little maybe less technical and a little more about making sure people understand the value of your tour. Because often people get really hung up. From my experience, I've noticed this over the years. People get really hung up on how to shoot it, how to, pitch it to their clients, but they really don't, sort of think about maintaining their customer retention and then showing the value of that product throughout the whole process. Because once you've sold the tour, you're not done. The easiest thing to sell someone is something they've already bought that they see the value in. So, once you've done all the energy to get that customer, like don't lose them, make sure that they understand what you're doing. So the next one is be prepared to explain how your tour works. So we kind of take for granted that sort of everyone sort of knows how virtual tours work. And COVID certainly did like push virtual tours a lot further than anyone ever kind of expected. So that's cool. But often people miss things. They don't really understand what they're doing when they're looking at a tour. They engage with it and they don't really fully engage with it, I should say. We see this all the time. The UI for most tours, even the really good ones, like Matterport is a very slim experience. It makes a lot of sense. I shouldn't say slim, it's Spartan. It's simple. It's good though. So they've got, the icons that are required. The experience makes sense for their technology. I think the iGuide is very similar. A lot of tours are, similar, but they're still kind of complicated. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of buttons there. People don't really know how they work. Yeah. So it's not good enough to just make a tour and give it to someone. Yeah. You really should explain to them how it works so that you can be really confident that they're getting the value out of it. And that's really simple. And it's going to seem really foolish when you show people sometimes, but it really depends on the person you're talking to. Their tech savviness level might be far lower than you imagine. People sometimes hide that. So I'll give you an example. Show people how to click and drag on the 360 to navigate. sounds really obvious, right? But sometimes people have no idea you can do that. Like they're like, whoa,
Yeah.
you can look up. It's like, yeah, you can. Or uh, depending on the tour, like using a scroll wheel to zoom in and out. Sometimes that blows people's minds, which is quite funny. Navigation, how to move throughout a property. People often don't know you can click and interact with things. Like clicking on a floor plan to go to the bedroom or whatever. Sometimes you have to tell them. If they never find the help that shows them how to do that, they would just never know. And then when they're let's suppose they're anyone, a facility manager, a real estate agent, someone in fire and rescue, when they're looking at that tour, they might, when they're communicating to someone, they might not know that, and so then that person who sees it doesn't get that either.
Yeah.
So that means that the information kind of stops. Like it's all there, but people aren't getting access to it, which
I
is
agree.
a shame. So they don't see the
Yeah.
value.
I think the average person doesn't quite know how to navigate virtual tours yet, but it's getting
agree.
better. And as time goes on, it won't be as important.
Yeah, I agree. I think people are really coming to terms with it. I think it has a little bit to do with gamification of everything. And we see that in a lot of the feedback that we get. So it's very common for people to want to use the WASD keys to like navigate. And I'm like, that makes sense. It's kind of cool. Like I get it. To make the experience a bit more like a video game. So that's kind of neat. Okay.
Number two
is share your tour. And what I mean by that is don't just hand it off to your client, whoever they may be, and expect them to do all the marketing. Because it's very common to give, this is mostly residential real estate, but there's some of this in other markets, but basically, or in other channels. But it's very common to give someone the thing they paid for and have them look at it and fully understand it and then never actually use it, which sounds nuts, but we see it all the time. And it's really easy to see, and that's going to be the next one. But your job doesn't end as soon as you shut the tour, is what I'm trying to say. So as soon as you're finished it, best practice would be to take that tour, if you have the permission to do so, share it yourself. I'll use Facebook as an example. Share it yourself on Facebook and then tag the agent, tag the, I don't know, not the homeowner, but the stagers, I guess. I'll tag whoever's involved who you can get away, the brokerage maybe. And if you can do that, what you can do is you can kind of you can lead by example. You can set the scene, hey, this is what you do with the tour. You share it, you spread it around, right?
Yeah.
Because it's absolutely acceptable to just take the tour and toss it on MLS. But in that MLS context, there's a lot going on. So it really depends on which listing service is being used. But we'll say, I don't know, realtor.com. People looking on there and they're going to see photos and there's branding everywhere. And then, the virtual tour is there somewhere. There's a button, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's there, but are people using it? Or are they seeing the value in it? It's hard to say. You're going to see some data associated with that. But if you put the tour on Facebook, this is like a hot tip for you guys. If you put it on Facebook, people will comment on it and they'll share, and you can build up some momentum. And that's instant feedback that tour is doing whatever it's supposed to do. And that, people are very complimentary when they see this stuff, right? They're like, oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Good stuff. I want one of these for my house or whatever. And that creates like a feedback loop where the more people share, the more positive feedback they get. So the more tours they want to order. So you're really reinforcing the value that tour is bringing. And you can attempt to encourage. So this is like the next step. You can also encourage people to share it themselves. That's pretty important. But I would argue that if you share it yourself, if you have permission to do so, again, you're really, you're taking the path of least resistance. So what I mean by that is that trying to convince other people to do things is really, really hard. Just across the board.
Well, the more people that share it, the better.
Oh, exactly. And there's nothing wrong with sharing it yourself,
Yeah.
and then them also sharing it, or them sharing your share, your post.
You're
That's
doing
fine
your
too.
client a favor, actually.
Yeah. It is so easy to share online that and people often see, it's one extra step. I don't want to have to do that. They're not paying me for that, but it's so easy, and it'll pay for itself because they'll see more value in the product that you provided them. So that's my hot take on that, is that you should share it yourself and tag everyone on everything. Instagram, maybe not LinkedIn, Twitter, what else? I don't know, Pinterest. What other social media is still relevant now? I have no idea. Okay. This is the last one.
Last but not least.
Number one. As soon as you've created your tour, you've spent all this time and energy on it. You've you've shared it with your client, they're sharing it. Don't stop. Look at the results of your tour. So this is really funny because I'm totally guilty of this as well. I've made like thousands of tours. I almost never look at them after I'm done making them. I just move on to the next. I don't even care. But if you go and have a little quick sneak peek there, you can see things that are signs that people are not using the tours. So that's just going to ties right into the previous thing. Mm-hmm. So if you were to look at analytics for a tour, every platform is different. So they're all going to have different styles of analytics, but they're all very similar. Mm-hmm. Analytics is almost always broken down into like traffic, over a period of time, maybe last 7 days, last month, last year, whatever, all time. And referral source. And that's sort of like where people are coming from. And then sort of like duration. Yeah. So duration and sometimes bounce rate, but duration, people are going to spend, a significant amount of time on a virtual tour compared to other types of media. So it's a good news story most of the time. They might spend 5 minutes looking at tour. So that's great. So you can talk to that. But the overall traffic and referral traffic tell like an interesting story. So overall traffic is relative. So that means that for some properties, having 10 people look at that tour is a big deal. Whereas for other properties, that's terrible. You want thousands of people. So it's going to go property by property. But if you look at the analytics, and you see that number doesn't line up with what you would expect, okay, that's your sign. Okay, well, maybe I need to investigate a little further. And it's the same problem that we had just discussed, that if people don't go to that tour, then the person who bought it from you isn't really going to see the value, and then they may not buy another one. So you want to sell them more. And that's what makes a good virtual tour, is someone who really sees it, understands it, and wants to buy another one.
So there are so many factors in that. One is it been shared enough? Can they find that tour? 2, complicated tours turn people off. So the statistics I've seen for the most part is you get 10 seconds or less, right? It's to like capture somebody. And a lot of times you go in, you see the dollhouse, ooh, it's fancy. You go in and it's way too complicated, and there's too many scans, and people just shut off. So keep it simple. Keep it simple. Show people what they need to know, nothing more, right?
I 100% agree. And there's different approaches and there's different opinions. So if you're going for off the bat, like a lot of kinetic movement and whiz bang, that's cool. That's your thing. I prefer interesting, detailed, consistent, simple information so that people can instantly see the value. And they want to engage with that, and you'll see that in their visit duration, how long they stay, and the bounce rate as well. Like if they only hang out for 5 seconds, you can track that. The last thing in terms of the analytics, though, was what was it? Let me check my fancy notes here. It was traffic. Oh, referral traffic. Yeah. So referral traffic is awesome because it tells you where people came from. So if you look at the referrals, so you're looking at the traffic, you're thinking, there's not that many people here. What am I doing wrong? The referral traffic just tells you. Yeah. It'll say, hey, everybody came from realtor.com, but there's nobody from Facebook. I should probably post it on Facebook. So sharing and analytics work together. Yeah. You want to share the tour, and then you look at the analytics to see if you did your job. Like, did it work? And if it didn't work, like, did you mess something up? I'll give you an example. The other day I posted a video on Facebook, and I didn't make it public. I just shared it directly with my wife. I was like, so disappointed. My mom didn't even like it. Jeez. Then I realized I just messed it up. And that can happen with MLSs. You can mess up a URL. So if you never went to check, people might not even be getting that information. So it's just kind of one of those things. And no one wants to do that. As soon as you're done the shoot, you just want to get it out and then be done with it. But you should. That's my hot take on that. Okay, that was 10 things.
Yay, that was great. That was a great discussion.
That was fun, yeah.
Mostly your information, but yeah, thank you. So hopefully everybody's watching. You now know how to make a great virtual tour. Remember, keep it simple and make it something that people actually want. So thank you, Chris. Again, as always, you've been delightful and very informative, and I appreciate your time. And he works for iGuide, so check them out too.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right. Take care, everyone. Stay safe. I'll see you next time. Until then, bye-bye.